The first time I realized I wasn't invited the way you invite family, I was standing in my own kitchen, holding a stamped envelope like it was something fragile. The paper smelled faintly of perfume and printer ink, and my hands, old hands, soft from dish soap and years of folding towels, actually started to shake. It was my grandson's wedding, Caleb's. I had paid for it, quietly, the way I'd paid for so much in our family, without asking for applause, without putting my name on anything. I'd done it because love, to me, has always looked like covering what needs covering. Electricity, groceries, tuition, a winter coat when the wind was sharp and nobody wanted to admit they were cold. The invitation was heavy with gold script, the kind you run your finger over. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Whitaker request the honor. Thomas Whitaker, my daughter's husband, wasn't even Caleb's father. Caleb's father, my late son Charles, had been dead 11 years, and still they wrote it like our history began the day my daughter remarried. I read the card once, then again, slower, as if my eyes had missed something important. There was a little insert for the reception dinner, another for the hotel block, and a small note in my daughter Linda's handwriting. "Mom, we're so grateful for your help. We'll call you about the seating later." The word later sat on the page like a closed door. Outside my window, the maple tree was bare, branches tapping the glass in the December wind. My kettle clicked off, and I didn't move. I just stood there, listening to my old refrigerator hum, thinking about how odd it was that a life could be full and quiet at the same time. I'm 68. I'm the kind of grandmother who keeps bandages in her purse and a spare phone charger in the glove compartment. I know the names of the neighbors' dogs. I pay my bills on time, every month, and I still write the check number in the register because my mother taught me to. I live alone now, in a little ranch house in Ohio that Charles bought when the kids were small, back when my knees didn't ache and my hair was the color of honey. When Charles died, he left behind a silence that was bigger than any room. A heart attack on a Tuesday morning. One minute he was teasing me about burning the toast. The next minute there was a paramedic in my living room asking me his date of birth. After the funeral, people brought casseroles in aluminum pans and said I was so strong, as if grief was something you lifted with your back. I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow. Linda moved in for a while after Charles's funeral, saying she wanted to help. She brought Caleb, who was 16 then, still tall and awkward, and pretending he wasn't a child anymore. For a little while, it almost felt like we were a family under one roof again. Then Linda met Thomas at church, and life started to rearrange itself around him. Their wedding was small. I wore a pale blue dress and smiled until my cheeks hurt. I told myself love was love, and if Thomas made her laugh, that was enough. But years have a way of revealing what's under the paint. The wedding Caleb was planning now wasn't small. It was the kind of wedding with a venue that called itself an estate, a menu tasting, and a photographer who charged by the hour like a lawyer. Caleb's fiancée, Brittany, liked blush roses and candlelight, and those little white chairs lined up in perfect rows. She was sweet in a bright, practiced way, and when she hugged me, she smelled like vanilla lotion and confidence. The first time Linda called me about money, she didn't say money. She said help. "Mom," she'd begun, dragging the word out like she was tired already. I could hear her dishwasher running in the background, plates clinking. "Caleb and Brittany found the perfect place. It's just, you know how things are right now. Everything costs more." I knew exactly how things were. My heating bill had climbed so high that I'd started wearing sweaters indoors. I'd canceled my cable and learned to live with quiet evenings again. "Still," I said, "how much?" There was a pause, the kind where you can almost hear someone deciding what kind of daughter they're going to be. 10,000 would get us started. $10,000. I stared at the stack of envelopes on my counter, gas, water, insurance, and felt something old in me rise up. Not anger, responsibility, habit. After Charles died, there had been life insurance money. Not millions. Enough. Enough that I could pay off the house and put some aside. Enough that I could help my family when they stumbled. I'd always told myself I would use it carefully, like a flame you shield from wind. And what is a wedding if not a day people want to remember without worry? I'll see what I can do, I said, because I always said that, because my children had learned that those words meant yes. Over the next months, it wasn't 10,000. It was deposits and alterations, a DJ, a florist, just a little extra for the open bar so people don't complain. It was Brittany's mother calling once, voice stiff as starch, saying she appreciated my contribution as if I were sponsoring a charity event. Each time, Linda sent me numbers in texts, not requests exactly. Numbers, as if the decision had already been made and my role was to match it. I wrote checks at first, the old-fashioned way. I'd tear them from my checkbook, write the amount carefully, and then I'd photocopy them on the little printer Charles bought years ago, the one that whines like it's complaining. I kept the copies in a manila folder on my desk because something in me, some cautious little voice, wanted proof of where my money went. Later, Linda asked if I could just transfer it. "It's easier, Mom," she said. "We can keep everything organized." Organized, that was her word for it. So I sat at my computer, squinting at the bank website, typing routing numbers with the carefulness of someone defusing a bomb. I printed the confirmation pages too, and slid them into the same folder. I told myself it was just good sense, like keeping receipts for a big purchase. The day I met Brittany's wedding planner, I realized how far it had all gone. Her name was Marjorie, and she wore black like she was always attending a very tasteful funeral. She came to the venue walk-through with a clipboard and a headset, speaking in that brisk tone people use when they're used to getting what they want. Linda introduced me as Caleb's grandmother, nothing more. Marjorie smiled at me, polite and distant. "Lovely to meet you." I waited for someone to say, "This is the woman who made this possible." Not because I needed a crown, just because it felt strange to be invisible in a room I'd paid to rent. As we walked, I trailed behind the others, my shoes clicking on the marble floor. The place smelled like lemon polish and money. Brittany pointed at a grand staircase and said she wanted a photo there with her bridesmaids. Caleb nodded like a man being carried along by a current. Then I heard Marjorie say, "We'll need to finalize the seating chart by Friday." Linda laughed lightly. "Oh, you know my mom. She'll sit wherever." It was said as a compliment, like I was easy, like I didn't take up space. I wanted to tell her right there that wherever is not a place, that a person deserves to be placed with intention, not tucked away like an extra chair in a closet. But I didn't. I smiled. I swallowed it. I told myself not to be sensitive. Weddings are stressful. People say things. Family's family. Still, on the drive home, the sky was a flat winter gray, and I felt a heaviness settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. At a red light, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, the soft lines around my eyes, the silver in my hair, and I wondered how many years I had spent making myself small so others could feel comfortable. 2 weeks later, Linda called me from the bridal boutique. "I'm at the dress fitting with Brittany," she said, voice high with excitement. I could hear laughter, hangers sliding on metal racks. "Mom, can you cover the alterations? It's not much, just—" "How much?" I asked again. $800. $800 for something that already cost more than my first car. I said yes. Of course I did. Then I hung up and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the grain of the wood. Charles used to sit there with his coffee and read the paper. When he was alive, he would have asked why nobody else was paying. He would have told Linda to slow down. He would have looked Caleb in the eye and reminded him that love isn't measured in centerpieces. Without Charles, it was like the family's compass had been removed and everything tilted toward whoever spoke the loudest. Then came the invitation, and later. After I read it for the third time, I called Linda. She didn't answer. It went to voicemail, her cheerful recorded voice saying, "Hey, leave a message," as if she had no idea a storm might be forming on the other end. So I called Caleb. He answered on the fourth ring, breathless, like he'd been running. "Grandma! Hey, what's up?" I could hear music in the background, maybe in his car. The bass thumped faintly through the phone. "I got the invitation," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "It's beautiful." "Oh, yeah," he said quickly. "Brittany picked it." "I didn't see my name on the dinner card," I said. "There's no meal choice for me." There was a pause, not a long one, but long enough. "Well, Grandma, the dinner is kind of limited." "Limited how?" I asked, though my stomach had already tightened. He cleared his throat. It's mostly for family and the wedding party. The venue charges per head, and..." I sat very still. My kettle had cooled. The house felt suddenly too quiet. "Caleb," I said softly, "what am I to you?" No, he rushed, panic slipping into his voice. "Grandma, you're family. Of course you are." "Then why is there no seat for me?" The words came out calm, but my hand curled around the edge of the table. "Why would I be invited to a wedding I paid for, but not to the dinner?" He exhaled hard. "Mom said you wouldn't mind. She said you don't really like big dinners anyway. And Brittany's parents, they wanted to keep it, balanced. Balanced. Like I was a weight to be measured. I felt something crack in me, but it wasn't the loud kind of break. It was the quiet kind, the kind that happens deep inside when you finally accept a truth you've been avoiding. "I see," I said. "Grandma, please," Caleb said. "It's not like that." But it was like that, exactly like that. After we hung up, I went to my desk and opened the manila folder. Inside were the photocopied checks, the transfer confirmations, the invoices Linda had emailed me, the venue deposit, the catering installment, the florist contract. I hadn't read every line closely before. I'd trusted. I'd assumed my help automatically came with respect. Now, in the soft lamplight, I laid the papers out like evidence. I found the venue contract first. It was in Linda's name, not Caleb's, not mine. Linda had signed it, and under payer, it listed her account information, an account I recognized as the one I'd been transferring into. Then I found the catering agreement. The guest count was written in neat type. Under VIP seating, there was a note. Parents, bridal party, immediate family. Immediate family. As if grandmothers were distant relatives you waved at from across a room. My throat tightened, and for a moment I let myself feel it all. Not just the humiliation, but the grief underneath it. The grief of being the one who holds everyone up and still ends up sitting alone. I thought about the times Linda had dropped laundry off at my house without asking, the way she'd leave grocery lists on my counter, as if I were her personal pantry, the way Thomas had once handed me his phone bill and said, "Can you take care of this while you're at the bank? You're already going." I had done those things because love makes you generous, but there is a thin, dangerous line between generosity and being used. That night, I didn't sleep much. The wind rattled the gutters, and somewhere down the street a dog barked once, then went quiet again. In the dark, I replayed Caleb's words. "Mom said you wouldn't mind." And I realized that was the whole problem. They had built a life on the assumption that I would not mind. By morning, my decision wasn't angry. It was clear. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my phone and the folder of paperwork. I called my bank first. The woman on the line had a calm voice. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" "I need to review my recent transfers," I said, "and I need to know what I can do to protect myself going forward." She asked me security questions, then pulled up my account history. As she read off the amounts, my chest tightened again. Not because I regretted helping, but because I saw the pattern laid bare in numbers and dates. "Is someone pressuring you to send these funds?" she asked gently, the way professionals are trained to ask when they suspect exploitation. The question landed in my lap like a stone. "No," I said after a moment. "Not pressure exactly, just expectation." "I understand," she replied. "We can set up alerts for transfers, and we can discuss placing a note on your account. If you'd like, we can also talk about limiting outgoing transfers without in-branch verification." "In-branch verification?" I repeated, liking the sound of it. It felt like a boundary with a lock. After that, I called the venue. Marjorie answered, brisk as ever. "Marjorie speaking." "This is Eleanor Hart," I said. "I have a question about the contract for Caleb Whitaker's wedding." There was a brief pause, the sound of keys tapping. "One moment. Yes, I see the file. How can I assist?" "I'd like to confirm who has authority to make changes," I said. "And I'd like a copy of the cancellation policy and payment schedule." Her tone sharpened slightly. "Are you the contract holder?" "No," I said, letting the word hang in the air, "but I am the one who paid the deposits." Silence, then, carefully. "I can only provide certain information to the signatory, ma'am." "I understand," I said. "Then please note that I will be requesting documentation from the signatory, and I would like you to email me the general policies that are publicly available." "We can send our standard terms," she said, suddenly more formal. "What is your email address?" I gave it to her. When I hung up, my hands were steady. By noon, I'd called a local attorney's office, not for a lawsuit, not for drama, for clarity. The receptionist scheduled me for a consultation. "Do you have any documents you can bring?" "I have everything," I said, surprising myself with how true it was. When I said everything, I meant checks and transfer confirmations, but I also meant something deeper. I had my mind back. I had my sense of self back. I had stopped floating in the story they were writing for me. That afternoon, Linda finally called. "Mom," she said, voice light and breezy. "Sorry I missed you yesterday. We've been so busy. Did you get the invite?" "I did," I said. "Isn't it gorgeous?" she chirped. "Brittany's mother has great taste." "Yes," I said softly. "It is." There was a pause, a crack in her cheerfulness as she waited for the praise that usually followed. Then she said, "So, about the seating, we're still figuring it out." "I already know," I replied. Her voice tightened. "Know what?" "That I'm not seated for dinner," I said, still calm. "Caleb told me." Silence. Then a small, irritated exhale, as if I were making something inconvenient. "Mom," she said, "it's not a big deal. You can come to the ceremony and then maybe head home after. The dinner is expensive." I let her words sit between us. The disrespect wasn't hidden anymore. It was plain, like a stain you can't pretend is part of the pattern. "I paid for the wedding," I said quietly. "I know," Linda snapped, and then quickly softened her tone. "And we're grateful. But you know how these things work. It's Caleb's day. Don't make it about you." There it was, the old trick, turning my dignity into selfishness. I looked at the stack of documents on my table, Saskinkiti, the proof of my kindness. I thought about Charles and how he used to say, "Ellie, you can be good without being walked on." My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. "Linda," I said, "I'm not making it about me. I'm making it about respect." She scoffed. "Respect? Mom, don't be dramatic." "I'm not," I said. "I'm going to see a lawyer." The line went so quiet I could hear her breathing. "A lawyer?" she repeated, like I'd spoken a foreign language. "Yes," I said, "because I want to understand my rights and responsibilities when I pay for something, and I want to make sure my finances are protected." Her voice sharpened. "Are you threatening us?" "No," I said, and I meant it. "I'm protecting myself." I could almost hear her mind scrambling, trying to find the old version of me, the one who apologized, the one who backed down, the one who paid and smiled and sat quietly wherever they put her, but that version was gone. "Mom," she said, now trying a different tone, a sweet one, "let's not do this. Caleb would be heartbroken." "I love Caleb," I said. "That's why I'm not going to teach him that using people is normal." Then I ended the call. My heart thudded hard in my chest, but beneath it was something steadier. Relief, maybe. Or the first true breath I'd taken in years. That evening, I sat on my couch with a blanket over my knees and watched the streetlights flicker on outside. Cars passed, their headlights sweeping across my living room walls like slow-moving ghosts. I held my mug of tea and stared at the family photos on the mantel. Charles smiling in a baseball cap, Linda at her high school graduation, Caleb as a little boy missing 2 front teeth. I didn't hate them. I wasn't planning to ruin anyone. I wasn't going to do anything illegal or cruel. But I was done being the invisible wallet in the corner of the room. And as the clock ticked toward midnight, I knew the next thing I did would be the most important thing I'd done in a long time. Not for revenge, for freedom. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner, a combination that reminded me of school libraries and hospitals. I arrived early, my folder pressed against my chest, and sat in a vinyl chair that sighed when I lowered myself into it. On the wall hung a framed certificate dated 20 years back. The edges yellowed, like proof that time always leaves marks, even on authority. When Mr. Harris finally called my name, he didn't rush me. That alone felt like kindness. He listened while I spoke, really listened, his pen still in his hand. I told him about the checks, the transfers, the contracts that weren't in my name. I told him about the invitation and the missing seat, my voice steady even when my hands weren't. He nodded slowly. "You weren't obligated to pay," he said. "And you're not obligated to continue." Those words settled into me like a warm weight. Not obligated. No one had said that to me before. We went through the documents together. He pointed out clauses I'd missed, places where payments were scheduled but not yet due. He explained that until certain dates passed, deposits could be redirected or agreements amended by the signatory. Legal, clean, no drama. Just paperwork and timing. On my way home, I stopped at the bank. The teller recognized me. She always did. I requested the transfer limits we'd discussed and signed the forms with a hand that felt more certain than it had in years. Each signature felt like a small reclaiming. That evening, Linda sent 3 texts in a row. Short, sharp, asking what I thought I was doing. I didn't answer right away. I cooked myself a simple dinner, washed the plate, and placed it carefully in the rack. I moved slowly, deliberately, like someone learning a new rhythm. When I finally replied, I kept it brief. I told her I was reviewing my finances and that no further payments would be made without clear agreements and mutual respect. I wished her well. Nothing more. The phone didn't ring after that, and in the quiet, I realized something surprising. The silence didn't feel lonely. It felt honest. I woke before sunrise, the kind of early that belongs only to older bodies and restless minds. The house was still, wrapped in that blue-gray quiet, before morning decides what it will be. I sat at the edge of my bed and listened to my joints protest as I stood, a reminder that time always collects its due. Still, there was a strange steadiness in me, like I had finally put my feet on solid ground after years of shifting sand. I made oatmeal and ate it slowly, watching the steam curl upward. My phone lay face down on the table. I didn't want to see it light up. I wanted, just for a little while, to exist without reacting to anyone else's needs. By mid-morning, the messages came anyway. Not calls, messages. That alone told me everything. Linda didn't want a conversation. She wanted control. "You're overreacting. This is hurting Caleb. After everything we've done for you." I read them once. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into my email. There was a message from the venue, the standard policies Marjorie had promised. Pages of neutral language, refund schedules, deadlines written in firm black letters. It was all very calm, very unemotional. I appreciated that. Paper doesn't guilt you. It just tells the truth. Later that afternoon, I drove to the venue myself. The parking lot was nearly empty, winter grass pressed flat by frost. Inside, the air smelled the same, lemon polish and quiet money. Marjorie met me near the front desk, her expression polite but guarded. "I wasn't expecting you," she said. "I know," I replied. "I won't take much time." We sat at a small table near the windows. Sunlight spilled across the surface, illuminating every scratch and fingerprint. I told her I understood she could only take instructions from the contract holder. I didn't argue that. I didn't raise my voice. I simply asked her to walk me through what would happen if scheduled payments were not completed on time. She hesitated, then did her job, explained consequences, adjustments, limitations. Her voice shifted as she spoke, becoming more careful. Professionals recognize preparation when they see it. When I left, she thanked me, not warmly, but sincerely. That night, Caleb called. "Grandma," he said, and there was something brittle in his voice. "Mom says you're trying to cancel things." "I'm not canceling anything," I said. "I'm stepping back." "But we need—" He stopped himself. "I mean, we were counting on you." I closed my eyes. That word again. Counting. "I know," I said. "That's the problem." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Brittany's parents are upset." "I'm sure they are," I replied gently. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked, suddenly sounding younger, like the boy who used to fall asleep on my couch watching cartoons. "No," I said. "You learned what you were taught. That's not the same thing." He didn't answer. I wondered if anyone had ever told him no without anger, without shame attached. I wondered if this was the first time. After we hung up, I sat alone in my living room, the lamp casting a soft circle of light. I thought about how often women like me confuse endurance with love. How many times we tell ourselves that being needed is the same as being valued. Have you ever realized too late that you were being used? The next week passed quietly. Too quietly. Then the tone shifted. Emails arrived. Polite ones, suddenly. Requests for clarification. An invitation, real this time, to discuss expectations. Linda called again, her voice carefully neutral, as if we were colleagues negotiating a contract instead of mother and daughter. "Let's just talk," she said. "In person." We met at a coffee shop halfway between our houses. Neutral ground, smart choice. She arrived with her arms crossed and her lips pressed thin. I noticed she hadn't ordered yet, like she didn't plan to stay long. I ordered tea, chamomile. "I don't understand why you're doing this now," she said. "I'm doing it because it's now," I replied. She shook her head. "You're embarrassing us." I met her eyes. You embarrassed me first. That stopped her, just for a second. I didn't accuse. I didn't list every sacrifice. I simply told her how it felt to be invited but not welcomed, to be useful but invisible. I told her I loved her, and that love didn't mean surrender. She stared at the table, jaw tight. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower. You could have just let it go. I smiled sadly. That's what I've always done. We left without hugging. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. And somewhere between dreams and morning, I knew this was no longer about a wedding. It was about who I was willing to be for the rest of my life. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a grocery flyer and my electric bill. The envelope was thick, official-looking, Linda's return address typed instead of written. That alone made my stomach tighten. Typed words always feel colder. I didn't open it right away. I paid my bills first, writing the check numbers carefully, tearing the stubs cleanly. There is comfort in routine when emotions start to blur the edges of your thinking. Only after everything was stacked neatly did I sit down and slide my finger under the flap. Inside was a copy of a revised budget. New numbers, highlighted. A note at the top in Linda's voice, though I could tell Thomas had helped write it. Mom, we've adjusted things so it's more fair. Please review. More fair? To whom? The numbers told their own story. Cuts to flowers, yes, but not to the open bar. Fewer decorations, but the same guest count. And, at the bottom, a short paragraph explaining how family seating arrangements were still being finalized, as if that wound could be wrapped in softer language and heal on its own. I folded the papers carefully and placed them back in the envelope. I didn't feel angry. I felt tired of translating disrespect into excuses so I could keep the peace. Later that week, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Hart? A man asked. His voice was professional, measured. Yes. This is Daniel Morris. I'm the venue's financial coordinator. I'm calling to confirm whether the next scheduled payment will be processed. I appreciated that he spoke plainly. No guilt, no pressure, just a question. It will not, I said. At least not by me. There was a brief pause. Papers shuffled. Understood. In that case, I'll need to notify the contract holder. Of course, I replied. When the call ended, my hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the weight of finality. This wasn't symbolic anymore. This was real. Procedures set in motion, consequences that couldn't be smoothed over with smiles. That evening, Linda showed up at my house unannounced. I heard her car before I saw it, tires crunching on the gravel. She knocked once, sharp and impatient, like she already felt wronged. When I opened the door, cold air rushed in behind her. She didn't take her coat off. She didn't sit. What are you trying to prove? She demanded. I closed the door gently. I'm not trying to prove anything. You're ruining this, she said, her voice cracking just enough to sound sincere. People are calling, the venue, Brittany's parents, Caleb is stressed. I walked past her into the kitchen and put the kettle on. The familiar click of the switch grounded me. I warned you, I said. I said I wouldn't continue without respect. She followed me, arms folded. Respect? You want a seat at a dinner so you blow everything up? I turned to face her. I want to be treated like a human being. Her eyes flashed. You're being dramatic. No, I said quietly. I'm being clear. She laughed once, sharp and humorless. You always do this. You act calm so you look reasonable and everyone else looks cruel. The words stung, because part of them were true. Calm had been my armor for decades. But this time, calm wasn't a tactic. It was resolve. I raised you, I said. I buried your brother. I opened my home when you needed it. None of that gives you the right to erase me." She looked away then, just briefly. I saw something flicker there. Guilt, maybe. Or fear. Then it hardened again. "You could still fix this," she said. "Just send the payment." I shook my head. "No." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. The kettle whistled. I turned it off. Linda picked up her purse. "Fine," she said. "But don't expect us to forget this." I met her gaze. "I'm counting on that." After she left, I stood alone in my kitchen, listening to the house settle. My heart ached, but beneath the ache was something sturdier than I'd expected. A spine I didn't know I still had. The next days brought fallout. Emails from Brittany's mother, carefully worded but sharp beneath the surface. A voicemail from Thomas, all wounded pride and thinly veiled threats about family unity. I saved everything. Dates, times, words. Not to use against them, but to remind myself that this wasn't imagined. That patterns existed. One afternoon, I sat at my desk and reviewed my finances in full for the first time in years. Accounts, statements, automatic payments I no longer needed, subscriptions I'd forgotten about. I made changes slowly, thoughtfully. Each one felt like reclaiming a small corner of my life. I also made a list, not on paper, but in my mind, of what I would no longer accept. Not demands disguised as requests. Not gratitude that only appeared when money was involved. Not love that required me to disappear. That night, as I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, my phone buzzed once more. A message from Caleb. "I didn't know it would go this far. I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "So am I," I wrote back. But sometimes far is the only place truth can reach. I set the phone down and lay back, staring at the ceiling. My chest felt tight, but my breathing was steady. I didn't know how this would end. I only knew I was done pretending that endurance was the same thing as love. The days that followed felt like the quiet after a storm, the kind where the air is too still and every sound feels louder than it should. I kept expecting another confrontation, another knock at the door, or a sharply worded email. But instead, there was only a cautious distance, like everyone was waiting to see what I would do next. I filled my time with ordinary things. I reorganized the linen closet, folding towels the way my mother taught me, edges aligned, no rush. I went to the grocery store early when the aisles were nearly empty and the overhead lights hummed softly. At the checkout, the young cashier asked if I wanted paper or plastic, and for a moment I almost laughed at how grounding such small choices could be. Still, the wedding hovered over everything like a low cloud. I thought about it when I opened my mailbox, when I balanced my checkbook, when I watered the plants by the window that Charles had planted years ago and never bothered to label because he said I'd remember what they were. I hadn't. They were just green and alive, and that had been enough. One afternoon, I received an email from Mr. Harris, the attorney. He summarized our previous conversation in careful language and confirmed what I already knew. I had no legal obligation to continue funding anything not contractually tied to my name. He also advised me, gently, to avoid verbal agreements and to keep communication in writing. I printed the email and added it to the folder. The folder was getting thicker now, not with bitterness, but with clarity. The next call surprised me. It wasn't Linda, it was Brittany. Her voice was softer than I expected, less polished. "Mrs. Hart," she said, "I hope it's okay that I'm calling." "It's okay," I replied, and I meant it. There was a pause. I imagined her standing somewhere unfamiliar, maybe outside, maybe in a room she hadn't finished decorating yet. "I didn't realize," she began, "about the dinner, about how it would make you feel." I waited. I had learned the value of silence. My parents thought grandparents usually don't stay for the reception, she continued, the words tumbling now. And Mom said you'd understand. I should have asked you myself. I closed my eyes, not in anger, in relief. This was the first time someone acknowledged the harm without explaining it away. Thank you for saying that, I said. I don't want this to be ugly, she said quickly. Caleb is so stressed, and I know you've done so much. So much doesn't always mean seen, I replied gently. She sighed. What do you want? The question hung there, simple and terrifying in its honesty. I want honesty, I said. And I want respect, not special treatment, just truth. There was another pause. Longer this time. I can talk to the venue, she said. We can rearrange things. I'm not asking you to fix it, I said. I'm asking you to learn from it. She was quiet, then softly, okay. When the call ended, I sat for a long time, phone resting in my lap. My chest felt heavy but not crushed. There was something hopeful there, fragile but real. That hope didn't last long. 2 days later, Linda emailed again. This time, the tone was clipped and formal. She accused me of manipulating Brittany, of going behind their backs, of making myself the victim. She warned me, not subtly, that my actions would have long-term consequences for my relationship with the family. I read the email twice, then I forwarded it to Mr. Harris, just as he'd advised. I didn't reply. That night, I dreamed of Charles. He was sitting at our old kitchen table, reading the paper, glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up and smiled at me the way he used to when he thought I was worrying too much. You don't owe anyone your silence, he said. I woke with tears on my cheeks and a strange sense of peace. The next morning, I drove to the courthouse, not for a hearing, for records. I requested certified copies of the transfers I'd made, stamped and official. The clerk slid them across the counter with practiced efficiency. The stamp thudded down on each page, loud and final. Authority has a sound, I realized, and sometimes it's just a stamp. On my way out, I passed a young woman arguing with a security guard, her voice rising, desperation spilling out. I felt a pang of recognition. How often had I raised my voice in my head while staying quiet in the world? At home, I scanned the documents and saved them to a folder on my computer, then backed them up on a small flash drive. I labeled it simply with the date. No drama, just order. Later that afternoon, Caleb came by. He stood on my porch, hands in his pockets, looking older somehow, tired. Can we talk? He asked. We sat in the living room. I offered him tea. He declined. I didn't know how much you paid, he said. Mom never showed me the numbers. I nodded. That's often how it works. He swallowed. I feel like I messed up. Yes, I said, not unkindly. You did. He flinched, then nodded. I don't want to be that person. Then don't be, I said. But understand this. Love doesn't mean access. It means care. He looked down at his hands. Will you come to the wedding? The question carried so much weight, it almost bent the air between us. I don't know yet, I said honestly. I'm still deciding what's right for me. He nodded again, slower this time. I understand. When he left, the house felt quiet but not empty. I stood by the window and watched his car pull away, taillights fading into the distance. For the first time, I felt like the future wasn't something happening to me. It was something I was allowed to choose. The morning the certified letter arrived, I knew before I opened it that something had shifted. The envelope bore the venue's logo, crisp and formal, the kind of paper that doesn't bend easily. I set it on the table beside my toast, and let it sit there watching the butter melt into the bread, reminding myself that urgency is often someone else's invention. When I finally read it, my instincts were confirmed. The venue had formally notified Linda of a pending payment deadline and outlined in neutral language what adjustments would be made if the balance wasn't settled. Reduced guest count, menu revisions, seating reconfigurations. No drama, just process. I folded the letter and slid it into my folder. The folder had become something like a mirror. Whenever doubt crept in, I opened it and saw facts instead of feelings. Linda didn't wait long. She called that afternoon, her voice sharp right from the start. "Did you tell the venue to send that letter?" "No," I said. "They're doing their job." "You knew this would happen," she snapped. "You wanted to scare us." "I wanted clarity," I replied. "Fear comes from pretending things don't have consequences." She laughed, short and bitter. "You're enjoying this." That hurt more than I expected. Not because it was true, but because it showed how little she understood me. "I'm grieving," I said quietly, "and I'm done." There was a pause. I imagined her standing in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, surrounded by half-packed wedding favors and lists taped to the fridge. "You've changed," she said finally. "Yes," I answered. "I have." We ended the call without resolution. Afterward, my hands trembled. Not with regret, but with the aftershock of standing firm. Even at my age, courage still took energy. That evening, I took a walk around the neighborhood. The air was cool, and the sky was streaked pink and gray as the sun dipped low. A neighbor waved from across the street. A dog barked behind a fence. Life went on, indifferent to family drama, and I found comfort in that. Halfway around the block, I realized something surprising. I wasn't replaying the conversation in my head. I wasn't crafting better lines or sharper responses. I was just walking, breathing, being present. Have you ever noticed how much space worry takes up once it finally leaves? 2 days later, I received an email from the venue addressed to all parties involved. Linda had asked for a meeting to resolve misunderstandings. The venue suggested a conference room on site. Neutral ground again, procedure, structure. I agreed to attend. The room was small and bright, a long table in the center, water glasses neatly arranged. Linda arrived first, stiff-backed, Thomas beside her, jaw tight. Brittany and her parents came next, faces polite but strained. Caleb slipped in last, eyes tired, shoulders slumped. Marjorie and the financial coordinator took their seats at the head of the table. Authority doesn't need to announce itself. It just sits and waits. Linda spoke first. She framed the situation as a series of unfortunate miscommunications. She talked about stress, about intentions, about how I had misinterpreted things. She never once looked at me while she spoke. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend my character. I simply placed my folder on the table and slid out copies of transfers. Dates highlighted, amounts clear. I explained, calmly, that I had funded the event out of love, not obligation. That I had expected basic inclusion. That when it became clear I was being treated as a resource rather than a person, I chose to stop. The room went very quiet. Brittany's mother frowned as she read. Thomas shifted in his chair. Caleb stared at the papers like they might rearrange themselves into something kinder. Marjorie nodded once. "Thank you for clarifying," she said. "From an administrative standpoint, everything Mrs. Hart has stated is accurate." That was it. No judgment, just confirmation. The meeting ended quickly after that. Adjustments were discussed, deadlines restated. Everyone left with a clear understanding of where responsibility now lay. Outside, Linda stopped me in the hallway. "You didn't have to humiliate us," she said, voice low. "I didn't humiliate you," I replied. "I told the truth." She turned away without another word. I drove home slowly, hands steady on the wheel. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat for a moment before going inside, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. For years, I had believed that keeping the peace meant swallowing my voice, that love was proven by endurance. Now I knew better. Peace, I was learning, isn't quiet. It's honest. After the meeting, the world didn't explode the way I once feared it might. There were no dramatic phone calls, no sudden apologies wrapped in tears. Instead, there was distance, a careful, deliberate distance that felt unfamiliar but strangely clean, like a room after furniture has been moved out. The wedding plans continued without me. I knew that much from the small signs. Fewer emails accidentally copied to my address, shorter updates from Caleb, the quiet disappearance of questions that once landed on my shoulders without warning. At first, the absence stung. Then it softened into something gentler. Space, I realized, can be a gift when it's chosen. I turned my attention back to my own days. I started going to the senior center on Thursdays, mostly for the exercise class, though I stayed afterward for coffee. There was a woman named Ruth who laughed loudly and unapologetically, the kind of laugh that filled the room. She told stories about her late husband with affection instead of apology, and I found myself listening more than I spoke. One afternoon, she asked me why I always looked relieved when class ended. "I think I forgot what it felt like to leave something without owing anyone," I said, surprising both of us. At home, I began sorting through old boxes in the hallway closet. Things I'd saved because someone else might need them someday. Extra dishes, unused linens, old paperwork tied with string. I let myself throw things away without guilt. I donated what I could. Each box carried out felt like a quiet decision in favor of the present. Caleb called once that week, not about money, not about logistics. "I wanted you to know," he said. "We cut the guest list. A lot." I waited. "And there's a seat for you now," he added, "at the family table." I closed my eyes. The offer felt different than I'd imagined, less like a victory, more like an afterthought made necessary by circumstance. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "So, will you come?" he asked carefully. "I'm still thinking," I replied. He didn't argue. That, too, was new. After the call, I sat by the window and watched the late afternoon sun stretch across the floor. I thought about how quickly people learn when comfort is removed, how rarely they question things when someone else is quietly absorbing the cost. I wasn't angry with Caleb. I wasn't even angry with Linda anymore. Anger requires engagement, and I had stepped out of that role. What remained was clarity, and clarity can feel lonely until you realize it's also peaceful. A few days later, I received a handwritten note in the mail. Brittany's handwriting, careful and rounded. She thanked me. Not for the money, for the lesson. She said she hoped one day she could be the kind of woman who noticed sooner when someone was being overlooked. I folded the note and placed it in my drawer. Not with the documents, but with personal things. Letters, photos, memories worth keeping. That evening, I cooked myself a proper dinner. Nothing fancy, just something warm and intentional. I set the table for one and didn't rush through it. I ate slowly, listening to the radio, letting the announcer's steady voice fill the quiet. I realized then that I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for an apology, not for permission, not for a seat at a table someone else controlled. For the first time in a long while, my life felt like it belonged to me again. The invitation arrived again, this time by hand, not mailed. Caleb brought it himself on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the sky low and white with winter light. I watched from the living room window as he walked up the path, shoulders slightly hunched, like someone approaching a test he hadn't studied for enough. I let him knock twice before opening the door. He smiled, tentative, and held out the envelope. I wanted to give this to you in person. I took it, feeling the weight of the paper, the careful choice behind it. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving aside. You don't have to decide now, he added quickly. I just wanted you to have it. Come in, I said. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Charles used to drink his coffee and complain about the news. Caleb's knee bounced as he talked, filling the silence with small updates. The menu had changed. The guest list was smaller. The venue had adjusted the layout. He spoke like someone reciting facts to keep emotion at bay. I listened. Then I opened the envelope. My name was there, correctly written, no abbreviations, no assumptions. And this time, inside, there was a place card mock-up with my name printed neatly, centered. I asked for it, he said quietly. I didn't let anyone decide for me. I looked up at him. Really looked. He wasn't the boy who used to spill juice on my carpet. He wasn't quite the man he thought he was yet, either. He was somewhere in between, learning where responsibility begins. Thank you, I said. He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath all afternoon. After he left, I didn't open the folder. I didn't review documents or replay conversations. I made tea and sat by the window as the light shifted. The question of whether I would attend wasn't about pride anymore. It was about presence. That night, I dreamed again. Not of Charles this time, but of myself, younger, standing in a crowded room with my hands full, smiling because everyone needed something from me. I woke with the echo of that feeling and knew, finally, what I was deciding between. The next morning, I called Linda. She answered on the second ring, cautious. Hello? I got the invitation, I said. There was a pause. Okay. I want to be clear, I continued. If I come, it's as a guest, not a sponsor, not a safety net, just a grandmother who loves her grandson. Her voice softened, just slightly. I understand. I also need you to understand something else, I said. This isn't a reset button. This is a new boundary. Another pause, longer this time. I know, she said. I know. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. In the days that followed, I prepared in my own way. Not obsessively, intentionally. I chose a dress I already owned, had it altered slightly at a local tailor who chatted about her grandchildren while pinning the hem. I paid in cash and kept the receipt, smiling at the small, ordinary normalcy of it. I practiced saying no in quiet ways. When Ruth invited me to join a committee at the senior center, I thanked her and declined. When a neighbor asked if I could watch her dog for just a few weeks, I suggested a boarding place instead. Each no felt lighter than the last. The night before the wedding, I sat at my desk and removed the thick folder from the drawer. I flipped through it one last time, not with anger, but with recognition. This was the record of a woman who had finally paid attention to herself. I didn't throw it away. I didn't need to. I placed it in a labeled box and slid it onto a shelf, like you do with books you've finished reading but aren't ready to forget. When I turned out the light and went to bed, my heart felt steady. Not excited, not afraid, just steady. And that, I realized, was something I had earned. The invitation arrived again, this time by hand. Caleb brought it himself on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the sky pale and heavy with winter light. I watched from the living room window as he walked up the path, shoulders slightly hunched, like someone approaching a conversation he couldn't avoid anymore. I opened the door before he knocked a third time. Grandma, he said, holding out the envelope. I wanted you to have this in person. I took it. The paper felt thicker than before, more deliberate. We stood there for a moment, neither of us stepping aside, as if crossing the threshold meant crossing something else too. You don't have to decide now, he added quickly. I wanted you to know things are different. I nodded and let him in. We sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, except for the ticking clock and the faint sound of a car passing outside. Caleb talked about small things at first: the weather, work, how tired Brittany had been lately. Then he stopped, took a breath, and watched me open the envelope. My name was printed clearly, correctly. Inside, there was a place card sample with my name centered in careful lettering. "I asked for that," he said softly. "No one else." I looked up at him. His eyes were nervous, hopeful, older than I remembered. "Thank you," I said. He let out a slow breath, like he'd been holding it all afternoon. After he left, I didn't rush to call anyone. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the light change across the floor. The decision in front of me felt quieter than I expected. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about whether I could show up without shrinking. That night, I dreamed of myself years ago, standing in crowded rooms with my hands full, smiling because everyone needed something from me. I woke with the familiar ache of that memory, and with clarity. The next morning, I called Linda. Her voice was cautious when she answered. "Hi, Mom." "I received the invitation," I said. There was a pause. "Okay." "If I come," I continued, "it will be as a guest, not as someone responsible for holding everything together. I won't step in, explain things away, or fix what isn't mine." Another pause, heavier this time. "I understand," she said quietly. "This doesn't erase what happened," I added, "but it does set a boundary going forward." "I know," she replied, and for once, I believed her. In the days that followed, I prepared simply. I chose a dress I already owned and had it adjusted at a small tailor shop. I paid, took the receipt, and felt oddly pleased by how ordinary it all was. I practiced saying no, in small ways, to favors that felt assumed, to expectations dressed up as kindness. Each refusal felt less sharp than the last. The night before the wedding, I opened the folder one last time. I looked at the papers without anger or regret. They were proof, yes, but more than that, they were a reminder of when I finally stopped looking away. I put the folder back in the drawer and turned off the light. For the first time in a long while, my heart felt steady. Not excited, not afraid, just steady. The wedding day arrived quietly, without drama, without urgency. I woke before my alarm and lay there listening to the house breathe around me. The morning light slipped through the curtains, soft and pale, the way it does when it doesn't intend to rush anyone. I dressed slowly. The fabric of my dress felt familiar, altered just enough to fit the woman I am now, not the one I used to be. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see someone preparing to prove anything. I saw a grandmother choosing to show up on her own terms. At the venue, everything looked smaller than it once had. The grand staircase, the rows of chairs, the carefully arranged flowers. Perhaps it was because I was no longer looking up at it all. I was simply walking through. Caleb spotted me before the ceremony began. His face softened when he saw me, and he crossed the space between us without hesitation. He hugged me, tight and genuine. "I'm glad you came," he said. "So am I," replied, and I meant it. The ceremony passed like a gentle wave, vows spoken, hands held, applause rising and settling again. When it was time for dinner, an usher led me to my seat. My name rested there on a small card, exactly where it should be. No one questioned it. No one explained it away. I sat, breathed, and let myself be present. Have you ever noticed how powerful it feels to take up space without apologizing? I didn't stay late. I hugged Caleb and wished him well. I congratulated Brittany, who squeezed my hand and whispered thank you. I nodded politely to Linda. There was no confrontation, no resolution wrapped in a bow, just acceptance. That night, I came home to my quiet house and kicked off my shoes by the door. I made a cup of tea and sat in the dark, letting the day settle inside me. I felt tired, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from honesty. In the weeks that followed, life became smaller and richer at the same time. Coffee with Ruth, morning walks, bills paid on time, laughter that didn't cost me anything. I was no longer the invisible solution to everyone else's problems. I was simply myself. Did you ever realize, a little late, that peace feels lighter than approval? If this story stayed with you, thank you for listening all the way to the end. If it meant something to you, a small gesture of support, liking or subscribing, helps these stories reach others who might need them too. And tell me this honestly, if you were in my place, what would you have done?